Testing 1, 2. Hey guys, thanks for joining us for PowerShell 101 with Michael and Christian. I'm Michael, this is Christian.
How's it going?
So today we're going to be extending on what we covered previously, which was objects and collections and classes and things like that. And we'll see how we kind of progress with that. So we're going to be covering a few different ways of being able to create objects in PowerShell. We're going to be talking about a little bit more object. We're going to reiterate what we covered last time. So we're going to be obviously going through objects in PowerShell, things like that. And we're just going to pretty much keep it there for the time being. We're not going to go any further. The next week there was Christian made a request, so we had to do a little bit of DSC configuration. So I'm kind of humming and hawing about it at the moment, but I do think next Saturday, not this Saturday coming, but next Saturday, I'm going probably to do a hackathon where I will be building DSC configuration for my for the Brisbane PowerShell user group WordPress server. So basically, from that, I'm going to be building having DSC configuration for obviously the Windows server itself, installing the roles, and then basically writing smart DSC configuration to be able to automatically update PHP configuration from internet, and obviously getting the latest versions of WordPress and things like that. So basically having a full automation and infrastructure as code there, so that basically I don't have to manage that. At the moment, I'm managing my wife's website manually, and I've kind of reached an impasse where I do think that I might, obviously if I've got to build 3 more websites, the third one's for myself, I do think that it's probably worth it to start actually building some sort of infrastructure as code. So definitely join us for that. This weekend I'm going to be doing a PowerShell.org forum review. So I've mentioned that last night at the user group. Basically I'm just going to be looking through posts and then basically providing comments, and from that basically providing a bit more of a lesson and basically PowerShell, and trying to provide a bit more context to those responses, and being able to actually give a little bit more of a lesson behind the scenes as well. So those things are generally really good, especially because obviously flow fundamentals and decision-making statements are really, really important, especially within PowerShell. Having that logic mindset, that doesn't come over time. That comes over time, but basically it's something that you kind of got to keep working at. Yeah, so how's your day been, dude? What's been happening?
Today was mainly a tutorial. Don't think I ever covered it before, guys, but I'm actually a student at the local TAFE. I'm studying a Diploma of Information Technology, and I'm just hoping that learning PowerShell will get me further down a career path in IT. And that's one of the reasons why I asked Michael to teach me, help give me a leg up, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So today it was mainly a tutorial class, a lot of catching up on assignments, things like that.
Yeah, it's fairly standard classes. Nothing
Nothing too major.
Yeah.
Monday and Tuesday, we do network infrastructure and server cluster. The server cluster mainly focuses on virtualization and configuration of servers, and the network infrastructure is all about the Cisco hardware.
Yeah. Cool. So that's obviously with the where he's studying will be a diploma of IT, and it'll be basically specialising in networking.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. So from that, basically, that's the diploma I've got. And like personally, even though I kind of went in knowing a lot, obviously you always go in with the attitude of being able to learn something, and you'll come out with a lot more being learnt. So especially with networking, I love networking. It's one of my other fortes I like to do. So I'm fairly proficient within Cisco, fairly proficient outside of Cisco. So I've got here my local machine, my local infrastructure here. I've got Cisco switching. I've also got I had an ASA, but that basically required too much licensing costs. So I switched to Sophos UTMs. So basically using SG firewalls and things like that to be able to maintain my local infrastructure here at home. Yeah, let's get stuck into it. So I think we initially talked about, firstly was just classes and things like that, where we obviously created classes, and we talked about objects, properties, collections, classes, those kinds of things. So we're going to extend on that a little bit today, and we've obviously looked at how to build a class in PowerShell. Classes obviously were a fairly new concept that came into PowerShell 5. But what we're going to do is we're going to actually take a step back, and we're going to look at those other those older ways to be able to do it. There's no set way of being able to create, whether it's a class, whether it's an object in PowerShell. For example, personally myself, I use hash tables with hash table arrays with anything to do with REST querying. It's basically either or. Object creation is generally it's fairly fluid. You can use the pipeline. We can use pipeline. We can be using creating custom objects. It's using select expressions, using select object that way, those kinds of things. And even we can use add type and some C# to be able to create objects as well. So let's get started. So first things first, we're just going to kind of just go through all the various items there. So I think the first one we want to kind of touch on is what we call new objects, new hyphen object. So this is a commandlet. So this is your first base commandlet, which is basically will generate an object of pretty much any type. And what I mean by any type, I mean it's a PS object. So basically, it is literally like it's a custom object that exists in .NET, but it allows you to build out ridiculous things. You can add properties, you can add your methods and things like that into it. It's generally used for creating, like when you want to create your custom objects. A good example was when we needed to create a custom object was I had a job which I had back when I worked at Mercy Community Services, where we needed to write a script that basically needed to ingest about 1,000 CSV files from Citrix. And Citrix is a VDI solution, so if you don't know what that is, just go quickly Google it. But basically, VDI stands for Virtual Desktop Infrastructure. So basically, in short, if you have a server sitting in a data center and you have a virtual machine like Windows 10 running on it, that virtual machine can be automatically created and deleted and cleaned up, and so those kinds of things are what we call the VDI implementation. Basically, it was reading through that VDI implementation and it was looking for any sorts of it was looking for users when they were logging onto the system when they weren't supposed to.
Okay.
So it's quite a lengthy process, but basically I need to create properties. So I needed to create a start time and an end time, and those two properties were basically the values were done from calculations, and this was in one line of PowerShell in what we call the pipeline. Would I do that again that way? No, not in a million years. 1,000 other ways to be able to do it more proficiently. It might have been good doing on one line. This really comes down to, again, PowerShell, yes, you can use the pipeline. I'm obviously encouraging people to use the pipeline, but there is a limitation when you with the pipeline. So if you're basically trying to do everything in the pipeline for the sake of trying to make it one line, it's not worth it. However, for example, if you want to take advantage of the pipeline and use the pipeline to, for example, get 80 user, enumerate, filter 80 user, and then disable those users that you've just filtered, that makes practical sense.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because you're actually taking that one output and then piping it to another. But let's say you wanted to do a whole bunch of other code with that, and let's say you wanted to write it to a report or something along those lines. It starts getting a bit murky in that situation, and personally myself, I wouldn't do it because that specific line should have a specific task, and you're kind of muddying the task by adding other tasks to it. And what I mean by task, task is a bad word. Objective. It needs to have a clear objective. So if the objective is, for example, to disable Active Directory users, that's the objective. That's what you should keep. I wouldn't go and add another pipeline and then go, all right, I want to like grab those users and then rename their their user principal name. I wouldn't do that because that's better suited to its own line. That's another objective that needs to be in its own line, because as if you're reviewing that code, you need to understand, well, what's going on here, and if you miss that and it's off the screen, it's just obviously for readability. Other things which is really important with PowerShell was the fact that you can still, for example, and so this is not just it's not rubbishing on it's not killing off pretty much everything. So for example let's say I go get child item, recurse, delete item,
Yep.
remove item, and then you know what, I want a report of all that. So I might just go export CSV. That is still one objective. So export CSV is technically can be used in that pipeline perfectly fine. Like I wouldn't put that out of the pipeline. Anyway, back to objects. So let's get stuck back into objects. So what we've got here is we're basically just going to create our new object. So new object is a PowerShell commandlet. So we've got that here. So if we just go, we're just going to create an object. We've got a whole bunch of parameters. We've got type name. Type name basically dictates what type of object you want it to create. So in this type, we're just going to do a PSObject, like so. I am going to quickly touch on these other ones because this is something that you guys, it's really important. You see ComObject. ComObject, for you guys who are fairly new to PowerShell, ComObjects are basically they're the old school way of that VB script and those older scripting languages used to interact with programmatically with different systems. So for example, Internet Explorer has a COM object where you can actually create a Internet Explorer, a little browser thing, a little browser form that basically you can interact with. You had, what else you had? You had file system object, which was a COM object. You had the WScript object, and each of these were just like, in essence, were just classes. Obviously, with PowerShell, you don't really need that anymore. Also, with any sort of like, I've seen a lot of code out there, especially when it comes to, like, for example, if you're using Microsoft Excel. Excel's a big one, or like our Microsoft Word. They will use COM objects to interact with Word. While that's good, and that's quite feasible, today it's actually not recommended. It's better to use what we call the, they're not the interrupts, are they? I think they are the interrupts in .NET, which basically is the .NET equivalent.
Okay.
And the reason why is COM objects, I wouldn't say they're deprecated, but they're just, they lack functionality now, especially you wouldn't use a COM object when you have the full experience of .NET there, because .NET can do pretty much anything, and COM objects are restricted to a certain scope. So you're kind of limiting what you can do in that script. But that's just really important to note where you got your COM object. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to quickly jump onto the scene, like so, and we're just going to jump in here so we can have a quick look. So we've got our PS object. Now, if I run and execute that, basically it's created an object.
Yeah.
The way that I add properties is what we use is the command called add member. So if we've got objects, and then what we do is we just go add member. Then we go member type note property. You got different types of members. Most common one is note property. So basically we're just going to go note property. You've got the name of the member. This is the property name. So you remember how we had, if we went back to classes here, we had all these items.
Yeah.
This is what I'm talking about. They're the property name. So, sorry, my nose is really itchy. So in this instance, we're just going to call it property name. And then you have another item called value, and we're going to call that test. I saw a second value there, and I'm interested. I'm actually really interested. So what we're going to do is run that. If we dump out objects, you can see there's our property. And so if I go .test, it's .property name, there's our value. So it's fairly basic. What I actually saw there, and I'm really interested. I want to run this again. This is going to be interesting because I want to show you what happens when you try and add a property on top of property. So we've got two properties side by side. You're going to see this cannot add a member with the name property name because because a member with that name already exists. To overwrite that member, you always add the force parameter to
Okay, so in this case you'd go /value test -force.
Yeah, exactly. So basically you're just adding that force, and that basically sorts that out. So if we go add member, I just want to see something because I just kind of, it intrigues me. I'm just going to go another property. I saw value, I'm just going to go val1, and then I saw a second value, and I'm like, you know what? What the hell? I want to see what this does. I haven't done this before, so this is, I'm trying to understand what it does. The second value parameter is not necessary for the type of node property and should not be specified. Do not specify. Okay, I'm actually going to try and have a quick look and find out what second value is used for, because that is intriguing. Just going to have a quick look up on TechNet. So, where is... Ah, okay.
So I guess the thing to take home here is that you're always learning.
100%, always learning. I could spend a lifetime trying to learn PowerShell and you wouldn't be able to grasp it. Jeffrey Snowden, who's the inventor of PowerShell, wouldn't be able to grasp all the components. It's just PowerShell grew so rapidly, so fast. You're just not going to understand. Like, no one's going to have a full understanding of every command. Like, you're going to generally have a good understanding of it, but it's a bit like, you know, if you use ipconfig a lot, you're going to go, okay, I got ipconfig, fantastic. But then you've got that flush DNS. You obviously can do release and renew, but then you've got flush DNS, and that's kind of like a little bit of a, oh, you can flush your local DNS. That's cool. And so those are the kinds of things. It's just, if you go about this way, it's really important because it teaches you, when you do that, you can obviously learn a lot more about what you're doing, and obviously you can go back to the table with a lot more confidence and say, hey, or there might be a better way to do it. So this second value might have something in mind when I need to come to a script and go in the future and go, well, hang on, this might be a better way of doing it. So when value is specified in alias time written, second value parameter indicates the value from when the method returns should be cast as a string type. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, you can copy all your objects. Fourth command uses .notion when it uses the when method.
Do you want to drag that window over so everyone can see?
Yeah, give me 2 secs. I'll just do that. Just minimize. I'll just maximize that, and then I can maximize this one. So what I'm looking at is the second value parameter here. So when an alias property is an alias for the time written property, when an alias property for the time written property of the object, hang on, these commands add the when alias property to an event in the system event log. Interesting. So I'm just reading that. Okay, yep, get that. Member type, name when. Yep. Time written. So it's an alias property, okay. The event is an event log object that returns a get event log command. Yep, when the alias property is an alias with the second value parameter is used to specify that the property value should be converted to a type string when accessed by the... Okay, that's interesting.
Essentially, my understanding there is that the second value is to say what it should pass the actual value as.
It's casting as type, yeah. That's really interesting because I'm looking at time written. Where's time written? Yeah, event.timeWritten. Yep, get system member type. Get system member type name system.datetime. Ah, I get it. Yeah, okay. That's really cool. That's cool. Okay, good to know. It's always good to know. These things are always good to know. So, so basically, this is how you add members. So we can actually continue to add members. Note that this is one thing that's just really important for you guys. Note that you're actually you're seeing how I'm not specifying equals. So you see how I'm doing that?
Yeah.
So the reason why is because PowerShell is actually doing that for us. So I'm piping it, and the pipeline is actually doing that for us. So when I go test 2 and test 3, that'll create me a whole bunch of... so if I dump out object, just go clear. What? That should have worked.
You're forcing it, and they all have the name, the property name.
Ah,
and you can only have one property name.
Good spot, mate. I was thinking, I got confused with the other way. I was like, that should work, and then I was thinking, yeah, it's not, and then I realized you're right. So really observe it. So that's basically how you create your properties using add member. As you can see, it's fairly basic. I'm not gonna spend too much time on it. It's always a good start to use that. I'm not gonna there's many other ways to do it. That way is really good for pipelining. A couple of really important things though. So let's say the reason why this is good for pipeline is, let's say you've got a custom object. So let's say I want to, let's say I do get process, and I want to add a property to that. So what I need to do is I can go add member, like so, and that will actually add that member to each of those objects in that collection. Just go PowerShell life value. And what I'm going to do is save it into the A variable.
Yeah.
So now if I get A, don't tell me it didn't work. Why didn't it work? The reason why it didn't work, this is really important, it gets me every time. When you do an add member inside of a, in this instance, we're basically adding that member to get process. Obviously we haven't saved the output of get process, and that's what it looks like we're trying to do there. But add member doesn't pass the object back from the pipeline. So what we need to do there is we need to specify the pass-through property.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, the pass-through parameter. It's one of the few times that you need to kind of use the pass-through parameter. And this is one of those instances. It catches me out and it just caught me out again. So if I do that again, there we go. But now if I dump out, remember we're indexing 0, I could do that, or I could just do select object first one. And then I just do a format list. It helps if I can spell. You can see there, it's not there. Let's try star. Okay, so what I did was, when I did a format list, I only returned the initial. I didn't return the full. So if we're looking for PowerShell life, is it there? Pretty sure it should be. I think it's.
If you added it
actually
to the get member, it should be a member itself.
Exactly. So what we can do.
So it should be a process.
If we want to find out whether it's there, we can just do this. We can just do power. There we go. So what I did was, and this is one of the really cool things, we're going to talk about this in the select object a little bit further down the line. If you know partially the property name, because that I know the full property name, but I just typed in PowerShell and then used the asterisk on each side. That's enough. And PowerShell will select everything to do with that wildcard, and it'll look left and right. So if I wanted to go, for example, look to the right, obviously that. If I look to the left, it won't return anything. So it's really useful. So for example, let's say if I want to look for everything that's I, there you go. Anything that has a I in the property name, it'll return. So that's really good. That's basically objects using new object. It's really, I would say it's always a good starting point. Man, my beard's really itchy. Then we've got the next one, which is HashTables. I personally use HashTables. It really comes down to preference. HashTables, they're really good for properties. They're really good if you have a lot of properties that you want to create, and you kind of want to have it nice and organized. HashTables are also used for splatting. So did we talk about splatting?
Believe we may have covered it, but I don't remember
much. We'll cover it again. Yeah, we'll go through it again. So this is a hash table. I'm just going to go. This is a hash table. So hash tables are different. They're actually a different type, and they're denoted by the @ symbol and then the 2 curly braces. Within that, I can then start specifying my properties, like so. I do a lot of my code like this because for me it's really good to I just find it's easier to read for me. It's less to look at, so that's why I use hash tables. There's another reason why we use hash tables. It allows us to build dynamically out our when we're using it in splatting, it allows us to dynamically build out our hash table without having to make super complicated code. And I'll talk about that in a second. So we've got, and we'll just call it, let's just go PowerShell. Yep. So if we execute this, it's the same concept. So I've actually run it now. So I've run that now. That's committed into memory. How would you get the PowerShell property? Like you can drive on your on your keyboard.
Oh,
hang on. Is it turned on? Yeah, there we go. Try that.
Yeah, that would help if it was turned on. And it would help if I could spell too.
Remember, you got tab autocomplete, so you can tab it out.
I can indeed. I did clean forget about that.
Yep. The more you use PowerShell, guys, if you are learning PowerShell, tab complete, you'll get really good.
No.
So remember, it's exactly the same thing. It's object.property. So.
Yeah. So object.PowerShell.
Yep, that's exactly right. Now, one of the really important things to remember with this type of hash table is if I'll get you to do a get member on that hash table. So I want to actually look at the object type, because this is really important to understand. There is a really important difference between hash tables and objects. While Christian's doing this, there's a bit of background. Hash tables come from dictionaries, and obviously you have dictionaries in you don't have dictionaries in PowerShell, but basically they're dictionaries. Yep, that's correct. I'll quickly scroll up because you've got a keypad. So you can see it's system.collections.hashtable. It's an actual hash table within the system.collections class. What's really important is that hash tables operate on key value, where object operates on object property. While PowerShell, while we looked up here and we could see that hashtable.PowerShell equaled yep, that basically is PowerShell lying. PowerShell's actually being a bit cheaty and a bit sneaky under the hood. It's still applying the object principle, but for hash tables, it's really important to understand its key value. And what I mean by that is, let's actually have a look inside the hash table. So if we go hash table, you can have a look at the, we've got obviously our objects and methods. And I want to have a look at the items within it. So if I go hashtable.values, you can see they're the values, key values.
Yeah.
And then if we look at keys, they're our keys. So it's really, really important to understand them too. And it's really important because there is this clear distinction between them, and it will trip you up. This object type can be difficult to work with. The next object type, which is what we're going to do, hash with version 3. That's a better way to do it because it will cast it as a PS object, but in this instance, it's as a hash table, it's key value, and PowerShell's being a bit sneaky here. When working with what we call REST interfaces, you don't have to worry about this, but when working with REST interfaces and things like that, JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, you saw it yesterday. That really big code that you saw, all that JSON with the AMI information and the PowerShell user group, that's JSON. When PowerShell converts to and from JSON, it will convert it as type hash table. So it's really important because basically when you're dealing with things, you need to be thinking in key value pair mode. Don't be thinking an object, it will catch you up. Now, admittedly though, when you and this is where it really is going to catch you up, is when you need to test if a property exists. Because traditionally, the way you could test whether a property exists is you could do a get member on the object. But if we do a get member on the hash table, so I'm just going to go take a shortcut and do a get member, you can see that there's no properties and PowerShell property there. So what you have to do is you have to recognize that it's a hash table. And then once you've recognized it's a hash table, then you need to enumerate the keys and then get the corresponding value. And then that's how you match it. So for example, in this instance, if I wanted to work out whether PowerShell as it would exist, what I would do is I'd go keys, because that returns my keys. Now that's a string array. So if I do a get member on that, you can see that that's a type string array, or system.string. I know it's a string array because basically the easiest way to find out whether it's a string array is just do an index 0. Actually, no, it's not. Whoa, okay, that's concerning. That's not a string array. That might have an extra property. I'm just going to do a quick look to see if it's got any extra properties. That should be a thing. Oh man, that's not cool. Okay, it should be a string array. I don't know what's going on there. I have to go have a work that out. But anyway, so the most biggest important take home here is key value. You need to understand that it's key and value association, and it's not object property. But it's really good. Now, one of the really cool things you can do with hash tables, and you can do it with objects, and we did it here. We added properties to it, but it's a little bit extensive in the terms of amount.
Too verbose.
Yeah,
really.
it's a little bit too verbose. So if I wanted to, let's say, this is a really good example of being able to build a property out. Let's say we've got a commandlet. Now I do this extensively when I'm writing commandlets, especially when I'm talking to REST interfaces. You might have, let's say you've got what we call a route or a URL path.
Yeah.
Now for one parameter, let's say that parameter is all available users. It's going to go to this URL path. For current users is another URL path, and disabled users is another URL path. Well, we can actually, there's a couple of ways we can do that. We can actually change we can dynamically build it out, or we can set it. So for example, we can do this. So what we can do is we can basically say, okay, let's just say other is equal to null. I'm using null because null is basically, it's easier to detect. It's not an empty string. You're not doing anything. Null is a good type to detect for nothing, because if you set it to be null, the expected result, if something has set something, or set or get, it should be something else. But if it's null, then you know that nothing's come back. So it's usually the rule. So with this, what we're going to basically do is we can do this. So we can go if, let's just say if string, we're going to define a quick string, and we're going to say, let's say this is a string, like so. And if we go, let's string is equal to, we wanted to do something. Now, ideally, this would be better suited for a switch, but in this instance, I'm just going to do else if because. Yeah, I made a bit of a boo-boo there. I've been writing too much in C#, so I use the equals operator, and even technically it's a double equals operator in C#, but I'm kind of jumping back and forth all the time at the moment. So things fall in and out, which is fun. And we go saying this is not a string, and we'll just have those two values. So if we got hash table, we're going to go other. We can obviously set that property like so. So we can say, yep, that's us. Like so.
Yep.
And then we can go hash table dot other is equal to nah. I'm just going to put a parentheses there. So basically, we can set the property that way. But let's say you actually want to add that property. So that what we can actually do instead, so I'm going to execute that. We'll just quickly execute that. And you can see that the expected result will be, yeah, that's us. Really good, really good code, guys. You can see, yep, that's us.
Okay.
So that's basically, we're validating. We can set the property that way. But let's say we want to create the property, or we don't. You don't even know if that property needs to be created or not, because at the end of the day, let's say if the property doesn't need to be created, there's no point need to create it. So let's say, for example, if it is a string, the property gets created, and if it isn't, yeah, nah. So like so. Yeah. And then we're going to create the property. So the way we create the properties, if we actually have a look at the hash table again, we can do a get member. It helps if I can spell. And you can see that there's a method in here called add. Where is it?
If it's add,
yeah, it's right at the top. It's right up top. So this is really good because, and it has obviously you can see a ton of those other ones. You can do clear, clone. These are really good, especially because PowerShell objects don't have this full capacity where I can go, I want to add a member by just doing this. And this is something that comes back from the C# kind of days where what you can do is you just go add. I just want to add to that list item. It's so good. I want to create something. I just want to add it. Done. And it's so good. It just makes it so much easier. So I want you. I want you to. I'm going to quickly show you how to use the method. So you can see there. That's the definition.
Yep.
So you got two items there. You got a void add method, which is basically system object key, system object value. Then you've got an iDictionary type where you can go add, which is key.values. So it's separated. It's denoted by a comma. So you need to call the add method, and I want you to add the property. The property will be called. Let's call it. InSync, and the value will be called technology. So yep.
So that's add then.
Yep. So remember, yeah,
so it'll be.
Oh, hang on, you're in the wrong spot. So you just quickly go down a bit. Yep. Not a variable, FYI. You're adding a property.
Okay, so it would just be.
Yep. It's denoted by a comma. Remember, it's a method. It's not a variable. We're not defining a variable. We're running a method. So remember how I was talking about methods last time? So when you call a method, basically, if you want to specify, I'll quickly show you.
Yeah,
use a comma.
I do. Yep. Yeah, it was when we were doing that, the steal exercise.
Yeah, the steal a car.
Yeah.
We're doing a steal a car.
We didn't actually steal a car.
Yeah, we didn't steal a car.
People who didn't watch the last one.
Yeah. But we're basically, obviously, looking at how to call methods within PowerShell classes. So, yep. Okay, so obviously you see a bit of red squiggly over there. I kind of want you to have a bit of a think about what is not right with that statement. Now, it's 90% there. It's actually, sorry, it's 97% there.
I get the feeling I am missing a couple of parentheses and object denoter, like that, but no. Like that.
Remember, that's a variable right now. That's seeing it as a variable. You actually, technically, what you did before was correct, but nope. So remember, okay. So when we're calling items within add, basically we can just pass strings. So that should be your clue there. So we're denoting as a string.
Okay.
So if you look at 16, when we're encapsulating an item as a string, what are we doing?
Yeah, you add your quotation marks around it.
Yep.
And then it's calling for that to be a string as well.
Correct. So now I want you to F5 it and run it.
Just correct that.
Yep.
Whole thing?
Yep, just F5 it. It's fine. It'll execute. That's not F5. Oh, hang on. You got to go FN F5.
Yeah.
Because he's got the terrible keyboard.
It really is the terrible keyboard. I'm sorry.
So we've executed that now. So if we dump out hash table. So you can just go enter. If you want to get to the bottom of your command line in PowerShell, just click into it and just start smashing enter, and it'll go down to the bottom.
Or you just push the up arrow.
Yeah, you could just do that. But I'm like, enter. So hash table. So if we dump that out, yep. Hash table.
I've never been on a hash tail before.
Yep. So you can see there we've added that object. Oh, so we've added that property to the object. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to change it up. I'm going to re-execute that. I'm just going to re-up it. And that sounded really dirty. And as you can see, the property doesn't exist because the condition is evaluated to be false. So basically the next item, which would be it's evaluating, is 21. We didn't actually get a yeah, nah. So that suggests to me that obviously it's not a string, and it's something else. And obviously I've typed in there KJ, HK, blah, 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 blah. So that's pretty much that in terms of hash tables. Now I want to expand a little bit more with hash tables with version 3. So we've got hash tables there. I'm just going to quickly header these up. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to go version 3 hash tables. So what we're going to do here is we're actually just going to denote a hash table. Same process, but we're going to basically go, we're going to call it v3 hash table. And we're just going to go PS custom objects. So like so. As you can see, Visual Studio Code did it for me automatically, and I love it. I love it, which is really good. It saves a lot of time. What's it whinging about? I think it might be whinging about it. Function. Oh, let's see what happens. I'll have to never copy. Yeah, okay, yeah, it's whinging about that. That's fine. Never.
Yeah, you got one on the end there.
When you're running Visual Studio Code, like I've come from ISE, so I can just highlight the text and then just hit F8. But obviously Visual Studio Code doesn't support that, so I'll see if I can. Oh, I can. Oh, it does. I just highlight it there and then hit F8. Really? Let me try. Nah, doesn't work. Probably because it's running multi-line. It's not recognizing that it's a multi-line PowerShell item. Well, that sucks. But anyway, so same process. Oh, no, term.value. Oh, okay, it's not recognized as a command. So the reason why that's happening is because we haven't specified a type. So if we cast as a type, which is type string, and we F8 it again, now we have our item. So obviously now we can go v3. You can see our name.value, and it looks, and let's do get member on it, and you can see that there's a clear difference between the two. So even though it looks like a hash table, it's not. It's a PS custom object. Does it have all those extra stuff? So if we do a quick get member on it, do we have all that goodness? We don't.
So we can't use the add method or
so yeah, you
like
can't use those kinds of add methods and things like that within that. It's good to know, but like realistically, it really comes down to how you're building it. I want to quickly talk about splatting for a couple of seconds. Now, splatting's really splatting's really good with PowerShell. It is one of the most greatest things I love with PowerShell. So what I'm going to do, splatting basically allows you to define a hash table. The property name is the parameter name, and then the value will be the parameter value of a commandlet. What I mean by that is, let's say you've got a commandlet of get child item. You've got the property, the property name will be literal path, and literal path is the parameter name. So I'll show you what I mean. There's two ways we can write this, and this is really good because this is really used for those kinds of situations where you've got a really large command, like you're running a really lengthy commandlet that's got a lot of parameters, and you need to simplify it. You could be dynamically building out the parameters based on specific actions of your script. So let's say this condition's been met, and well, you go, well, I don't want to have 1,000 if statements and then doing things with this parameter here and running scripts. It's easy to build out a splat and then basically go, well, okay, I need to use that property, add that property, and set that value. And so when it gets down to that final line, when you're doing that, when you're calling that commandlet, you're just splatting the items in. So it allows for much more fluid coding, and it means that from a readability point of view, it's more consistent, and you're able to track the changes a lot more. From a debugging point of view, it's much easier to track as well, because obviously you can see the changes happening as they go. I had a good story. I had a script I was working on for a client recently where I had a JSON file being statically built out as a string. And what I mean by that is basically they was building out a JSON file by literally concatenating items in text like so. That is never recommended ever in PowerShell. And the reason why is I made changes expecting it to work,
and it
completely broke. And what the changes that I made were basically, I created objects. I created a hash table object, and then I started adding those properties to it. And I had hash tables within hash tables because you can. I can add, and then basically converting that to JSON. I thought it would work, but it didn't. So I have to actually go back and revisit it. But it's really important if you basically build it out as if you build out your object as a hash table or as your object, and then you need to convert to JSON. It's a cleaner way to do it, and it's obviously more supportable because basically you don't have to deal with all that kind of you're not statically building something out, and readability is everything. And realistically, it's easier. You shouldn't need to basically do that at all. So obviously we're splatting with a hash table. So what we're going to do is we're going to define a hash table called params. Usually when you see params, when you see the variable params, it usually indicates this is a splattable item. You can do other things, but usually when I'm denoting that I'm going to be splatting, I use the params name or the params variable name. It's nothing special. It's just a personal preference. You can have, if you've got multiple that you're doing multiple splats, you can basically do like get child item. You can name it something a little bit more, obviously a little bit more verbose for that specific parameter. But in this instance, obviously we have params. We're only having one parameter we're splatting. So it's the same process. So basically, we've got literal path. We're just going to go C, Windows.
My favorite directory.
Yeah, everyone's favorite directory. Now, there's two ways. So obviously, this is the traditional way. I don't necessarily need to cast that in a string. The reason why is the commandlet will do that for me. But it's always like, if you really want to be specific, you can just cast it. So in the second way we can do it is if we're splatting, we can basically do this. And so I'm using the @ symbol to denote that it's a splattable a splattable object that I'm passing into the pipeline.
Okay.
What's really good about this is the fact that when I'm using a splatting with that, it's obviously if you've got, think of it, if you've got a parameter, like you've got a lot of parameters in that commandlet, by having that as a splattable item in here, for example, it means that it's more readable. It's easier to read and understand and digest than it is to have, scrolling off the side of the screen. Because the last thing you want to do is especially when you're scripting, is being able to have to go off to the side of the screen to read something that shouldn't be there. Now, obviously you can escape sequence. So what I mean by that is, let's say I have multiple, let's say I've got another filter, for example, and I want to use filter. I can use the backtick and then put it on a new line. That will work. But parameter splatting really this is what splatting is supposed to be used for. It's basically allows you to dynamically build out your parameter block, being able to engage that and have the confidence to be able to engage that and not have to worry about any sort of weirdness happening. It also obviously makes it much more readable, as you can see. So you can imagine, let's say if you got 30 parameters off the side there. No, don't. Hate it immediately. And
it's like that script I first built. I had a bunch of extra files to get rid of, the SRT files.
Yep.
SRT files hold
subtitles.
Yeah, that's the one, subtitles, but they can also house malicious
software.
Software. Yep. So I wrote a script to remove them. Michael gave me a rundown on how to do it, but it was huge. I ran well off the side of the screen, and so looking at this would be a far easier way of carrying out such a...
Is that using the where object?
Yeah. Object.
So with that, you'd basically this would only apply to that specific commandlet in the pipeline. So you'd still need to use where object. But at the same time, however, though, like what we discussed then, when we obviously using the contains or the in conditional evaluator or the evaluator, we could actually have two lines. One line could be a string array of all the extension types that you didn't want, and then the other one could basically be your actual, your test. So that would be, get child item, remove item, where object, dot extension, is it dollar underscore dot extension? It is in that array. If it is, it obviously returns a Boolean value of true. Part that through, remove object, remove items. So those kinds of things. Yeah, it's fairly, yeah. That's. But parameter splatting is really important. I think I've got some code here. Let me just see if I can pull it up on my GitHub. This is really old code. This code I wrote for many years ago. Where what I did was I wrote a Zendesk PowerShell module. This is really quite old. I don't even think this is supported anymore. I'll just drag this across. Actually, I'll just drag this one across. Where'd it go? There it is. So let's maximize that, bring that there. So this is basically my GitHub. This is a private repo that I've been working on, and to be honest, it's probably not even. This is really old. This is when I mean really old. Let's see, have a look at this. Oh my gosh, this is terrible. You can see that this is a clear difference of code that's basically been written 3 to 4 years ago. I haven't wrote code like this for a very long time. But as you can see, I'm building object out here. Should have used hash table. Verify Zendesk object. I'm just trying to find if I'm doing any splattable items in here. I'm pretty sure I did, but
yeah, you do have one labeled param just up a bit up there.
That's a parameter block.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a parameter block. Script validate. Okay, you got my normal parameter statements. Okay, here we go. This is a splattable item there, so you can see I've defined my object parameter. I'm compiling the URI method and authentication headers, so I've got my method, my URI. If the body was specified, then add to that, so you can see I'm doing that. That is bad. That actually probably is not going to work because I need to use the add method. From that, I'm adding the context type. Again, I should have used the add method. I don't know why that is why I did that, but just use the add method. And then basically from that, if we have a look at, I'm guessing it's under invoke rest method. Here it is here. You can see that I'm splatting some items. Realistically, those should have been splatted in there as well. So I should have actually put in separate lines, error action silently continue, and invoke rest method. That's bad because that will never catch. What I mean by that is because I've set the error action preference in PowerShell to silently continue, irregardless if that invoke rest method ran, it basically would, if it had any sort of error, it would never get caught. It would basically just forever be returning whatever.
So essentially, you've broken the catch command by saying
exactly 100%. It's actually interesting because this is really this is something that obviously I've wrote many years ago, and I can look at it today and go, I would have done this 1,000 other ways. I wouldn't have used PSObjects. I would have basically built this in probably PowerShell classes. I would have done, done a lot more verbose try catching. So that's doing a single try catch. I would have done exponential backoffs, pagination, things like that. So obviously .NET Core supports pagination, what we call being able to recursively go through API request queries. But it's just something worth noting for you guys, the fact that these are how you use param blocks. Next item on the list is we've obviously talked about add member as hash. We've done that. New module, we're not going to talk about that one. We're going to talk about add type. So another way you can create objects is we can create C# object and then index and reference into that. This is more like PowerShell actually when we're doing classes and we're creating classes. But realistically, when we're doing add type, we're actually just creating. You usually you'd add a C# class, so it's not just. You wouldn't use it to create an object. You would use it to create you'd use it to do something specific in C#. Now, a good example of something in C# that you would use it would be if you're loading custom DLLs from .NET DLLs from different people. So they might have a software development kit or an SDK that you want to load in and bring in. So that's something where you'd use add type, and I would actually load that item in. In this instance, we're just going to write the C# and then pass it straight in, but you can basically, you can load in DLLs and things like that. But in this instance, you can create objects. It's always good to see, but we'll just kind of go through that. So now, I want to also quickly touch on for you guys out there that are actually watching this. Now, it's always frowned upon with adding reference assembly, because adding reference assembly is something that when you're adding a reference assembly, you generally, what's happening is it's the old way of using add type. Now there's times when you need to use add reference assembly, but in this instance, it's just like you should be using add type. So we're going to just keep that there. So just going to add type. And what I'm doing here is I'm denoting. You can see that I've got the @ symbol, and then I've basically got a just a quote. What I'm denoting there is this is a multi-line string. I've actually got to put an @ symbol at the end that basically says everything inside here is a string. That's better, especially when you obviously for readability. One caveat though, this needs to be at the beginning. It cannot be it can't be tabbed in. You cannot tab it in. If you tab it in, it breaks. So it's a good thing and it's a bad thing at the same time. I personally, I haven't had to use this for a very, very long time. I've actually wrote, let's see if I can find it now. I'm going to go have a hunt for it. I'm going to have a quick hunt for it because I think I've got it somewhere. I wrote a PowerShell aimbot very, very long time ago. And we're actually going to revisit that as part of our hackathons for Battlefield 4. Now, one of the really cool things was the fact that I needed, this is like going to be a pain to look for. I found it the other day and I was reading it and I was thinking, oh my god, this is such bad code. So we're not going to base it off that. Like, I'll base the initial logic off it, but I'm not going to like copy and paste elements from it because it's bad. But basically, it loaded a custom C# class in there. I can't find it. The reason why I did that was because I needed to hook into DirectX's. Was it DirectX? No, it was the system. It was the shell. It was the shell 32, which is basically Windows' shell. I needed to hook into the mouse. That was the most effective way to do it, and be able to still move the mouse in game. So, kind of overcoming those elements and using C# to do that. But anyway, let's basically create an object. So we're talking C# here. So basically, we're going to define a public class. So it's very similar to what we're obviously what we're doing within PowerShell. So we're just denoting our class. Then obviously we're going to denote our properties. So I'm just going to go public string let's just call it property is equal to null. And then we're going to build out. So we've basically denoted our property. Now we need to build our constructor. So we're just going to go public, and then we're going to go my class, like so. And then from that, we're just going to go return. Actually, no, we're just going to go property is. And you can see, I think I have to escape those. I'm just going to do a single quote on them. This is a string, like so. And then we're just going to return this property, like so. Same process. So if we add type, I think I need to create an object. Oh no, I've added. Yeah, no. So don't worry about me. It broke. Why did it break? Too many characters. Literal, public, blah blah blah. Oh my god, why did this break? I think it's because of this. I think it doesn't like that. Valid data exception, add type, yeah, okay, I think it's to do with that. I'll just give that a go. Did that work? I don't think it did. Let me just clear screen. I don't think it worked. No, it didn't. Okay, cannot add type. Compilation errors occurred. Add type exception. Public. Ah. Ah. No. 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 I don't need to put a return in there. It shouldn't return anything because it's an object. Just quickly clear it. No, why is that not working? It's a public class. There's my constructor. Do I need to void it? Yeah, you don't need to void a constructor because it's already doing it for you. That's what a constructor's for. I think what we might do is we'll come back to that one. I'm gonna have to have a bit of a play around. I'm pretty sure that compiles the C# because that's my constructor. So that's my property, public string property. Unless it's like I'm now intrigued. It's broken. I feel like I'm doing something wrong here. I just can't see it. Public because I'm basically creating the object and I should be able to reference the object.
Do you need to specify what the object is in PowerShell?
No, because that's what when you go public class, my class.
Yep.
What I'm saying there is the type is my class. So that's the type. It shouldn't need to do anything unless I'm just going to semicolon it. I'm just going to give it one more go and then we'll just move to the next one. Oh look, there we go. Perfect. So obviously I didn't include the system class, which obviously has got all the important bits and pieces in there. But now basically we have this type. This exists as a type. So if we go my class, it exists. You can see there that exists as an object. So that basically we can actually create an object. So we can go object is equal to new object, my class. You know, if you think about it, if I didn't put CL, that would be my ass. Random thing.
And this is why the channel's rated for mature audiences, people.
So you can see there's our property and we can obviously do things with it, but that's basically how we can do it within add type. I don't do add type. If I am using add type, I'm custom loading DLLs and things like that in there. I'm not using this specific thing. It's easier to have like a C# DLL or something like that. It's easier to add the compiled library from C# in than it is to actually have a specific string of text where you have your C#. And the reason why is because basically if it compiles in C# and you know exactly how it's written in C#, then it will just obviously translate across. It's just cleaner. So obviously what I mean by that is if you wanted to add a custom file, we can just go add type and then we just go literal path and then you specify your path to your DLL. Some random.dll, something like that. You best say how do you do it. We're obviously not talking about .NET methods or any sort of bringing in C# types for this. That's a little bit more advanced, but basically that's just something for thought. Next one is select object. Now select object, even though it's technically a way you can create objects. So a great example is, let's just use get process. So we've obviously got our get process. We can obviously run that. We've got our process. I'm going to create a custom object. So now I'm going to create a custom object based on those objects that we had. So we can go custom objects. So we can go select objects. We're going to go ID name. That's how you can create a custom object. There is one exception to that. We're going to talk about select expressions. Select expressions, not many people use them. They're really good when you need them. Select expressions basically are when you need to do transformation on an object, but you don't want to have to create a custom object. So a good example is, let's say we've got get process and we wanting to get, we want to append .exe to the end of those names. So obviously that capability is not there already. So let's say what we need to do is we're going to do what we call a select expression. So what we need to do is we do get process. So what we're going to do, this first thing is we're going to do select objects, and we're going to select the objects that we want to get. So the first object we want to get is ID, because that's the ID. That was the first thing. And then the second thing we're going to do is name. Now, let's say we want to append exe to the end of it. I'm not going to go every custom executable and work out what's what. For the sake, we're just going to append exe to the end of it because it's easier. So what we need to do is basically we need to denote our expression. So again, that's denoted by an @ symbol, and then basically from that we're encasing some curly braces. So within that we use our name, and then we go equals. The name is the property name. So
in this case, you would end it with like that?
No. So no? Remember, this is, so we're creating an object. So so we're still talking property. We're talking property and value. So property would be, let's say it's called, we'll call it process extension. I don't know if I've spelt that correctly.
No, you haven't.
No, I haven't. That's all right. You can go ahead and fix it. My English is not great. It's not great at all. So, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go, I'm going to put a nice a semicolon there. And that basically tells PowerShell I'm a new line. And this is really important because the next part we're going to do is we're going to do an expression. Now you can do this a couple of ways. I'm going to show you another way you can do a select expressions, and we can write shorthand, but this is usually the other way we can do it. So what I'm going to do there is go $, so the current object we're on, which is process object, and then I'm going to go value, and then we want to append .exe to the end. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to keep things simple for everybody because I'm going to denote an object like so. And I'm not going to make things confusing because that's really not what I'm trying to do here. So I've denoted my object, as you can see there, and then I'm going to go .exe like so. And so basically it's taking the value, oh sorry, actually, it's name. It's name, sorry guys, it's name. So I'm using the name property, and then I'm putting, that's inside a string, and then I'm putting that with an .exe on the end, so I'm appending .exe. Now there's a couple other ways we can do string formatting. In this instance, just to keep things a little bit simpler, I'm going to do it this way. I need to encapsulate it inside an object because basically if I don't, then PowerShell won't recognize the fact that the $_ is an object. So you need to wrap that inside an object and then basically put the .exe on the end. So if we run that, hit F5, and go process, there we go. You can see all of them have .exes on the end. Now select expressions is really good when you want to do like things like a good example is if you want to look like when you, for example, you do get child item and you're recursing through and you see the length property. The length property is the size of the file, but the length property is in bytes. I'm like, come on guys. Well, how do we go from bytes to we want to see, for example, megabytes?
Well, you divide by
1024 by 1024 by 1024 by 1024 by 1024.
So on and so forth until you reach the size you want.
Until you reach the size you want. But how would you do that in the pipeline is that you would use a select expression because that's really what it's designed to do. So it's basically adding that capability that's like using what's already there and then basically expanding on it. So a length is a great example because I don't want to have to look at megabytes. I don't want to have to look at bytes or megabytes. I want to look at gigabytes. Let's say you're iterating through a large collection of data. That really works out well because then I can see that's 1.2 gig, that's 3 gig, that's 4 gig, and it helps me identify that quite quickly. It's better for formatting, things like that as well. So it's those kinds of things is the reason why you'd use select expressions. I've seen a lot of times when select expressions have kind of been misused, and that's basically when you're trying to do something that's so outrageous that basically you stop, you reconsider what you've done, and basically, and these are the kinds of things if you're trying to grab another object out in here in the wild and try and bring this value in here and do that, and you can do that, But Select Expressions really is designed for just quick and dirty editing in the pipeline, and you want to add a quick property without having to write an extensive, like a huge line. If you want to add that kind of functionality, use add member. That's what add member is better used for, because basically you've got the value parameter, and that's where you don't have to deal with all the nitty gritty, and you can basically focus on that specific query. Now it's a little bit more longer, but that's how I would actually use add member over select expression in that instance. So I think that's pretty much it. I was going to show you guys a shorthand. So we'll go select object, and then we'll go select expression. I'm going to show you guys how to do a select expression in shorthand. Now, again, this is good for bashing out in the pipeline. I would never do this in script, because yes, I know it's a select expression, but at the same time though, full standards is what's required. And as you can see, I just put an N and an E. Let's execute that. If we dump out process, we've got the same thing. So I'm basically shorthanding it with an N for name, E for expression.
Okay, can you do the same with name there?
No, because it's explicitly defining the property. I could hypothetically, I could do this, but again, if you did this, it's easy just to put name. I could do like select. That would work. Would I do it? No, not in a million years.
Well, like you said, it's easier just to write.
It's easy just to write name. You're kind of like, if you want to shorthand it, don't. The reason why I'm saying don't is because when you're being explicit, explicit means good. If you're not being explicit and you think your script will start doing skew if things, and it will start going astray, and then you're going to have those really difficult variables that you need to troubleshoot. If you're watching at home and you got any questions, don't be afraid to shout out. I'm always here to obviously answer questions, but basically, yeah, obviously it's really good to kind of obviously get feedback, I think, as well, which would be good. Moving on, so that's basically a select expression, select objects. I think the final one will be obviously we've done custom objects. Oh, yeah, we're not going to do custom objects. That's just okay, yeah, we might as well. So again, this comes down to, I wouldn't do this because 5 completely does this away. So if you were basically in previous PowerShell 5 and you need to explicitly define an object type, so your object type would be, let's say our object type is blah. Let's just call it blah. I'm just going to create a custom object. I'm just going to write this in full hand. Then I can go object dot. There's a as you can't see it here, but there is a property called PS type names. This allows you to add and remove properties from the PS custom object. It also allows you to set the type name. So in this instance, we just go PS type dot insert. We're going to use the insert method, and we're just going to go dot 0. Actually, we're just going to have a quick look at what's. I'm going to quickly run this F8. Then I'm going to run this and get our overlines. So basically, our index and our item. So we're just going to say at 0, which is the first item, and because this is a custom prop object, we're just going to call it blah, custom.blah. So if we execute this, and then we dump out object, you can see it's still an object. Then we get member, you can see our type name is changed. I wouldn't do this. I think this is really, really dumb. The reason why is because if you're using 5, use classes, and the reason why is classes make things so much easier. I shouldn't need to define a custom object and then specify its type when all I need to do is just define a class and then call the class. It just makes more sense.
It does, yes.
Like it's a bit of a backwards thing to do. And obviously, yeah, we've done classes.
That's where they mention classes.
Yeah, so
next on the list.
So we're just going down. Well, if you guys probably are following along, we're going down a list of what a Technic article is. Basically, Microsoft were talking about the different types of ways you can create objects. So realistically, we'll just quickly drag this over so we can kind of go through it together and what we've covered. So basically, we've looked at creating custom objects. So we've got our new object, which is what we've covered right at the beginning. We've also covered
add member.
We've looked at hash tables. We've looked at version 3 hash tables. I wouldn't do new objects or new module as custom object. It's counterproductive. I do not understand. The main advantage is you can tightly constrain a member. I can tightly constrain a member with a PowerShell class. It makes no sense. I can tightly constrain a member with a PS custom object when I go add member and go member type, and then when I specify the name and the value, I can tie the value to that. So it's redundant. If I saw this, it would be immediately binned. It just has no place in PowerShell. I'm sorry, but it just doesn't. Add type, again, add type, you can do it. Would I do it? No, I wouldn't, because basically add type is used to actually add C# classes to PowerShell, or .NET, VB, or any other outside of item that you can reference inside of PowerShell as an object. That's what it's used for, but it's not specifically used to go, I want to create an object just to create a custom object in PowerShell. Again, that's over engineering something, making it more complicated than it needs to be. If I saw that, that's going in the bin, and I'm using a class, or even a hash table or a PS custom object. Select objects. So like we covered before, select objects are good for obviously selecting those objects, doing quick and dirty filtering, and creating custom objects where you want to specify your properties that you want. So in this instance, that's what it's used. We talked about select expressions. Select expressions are good for when you want to manipulate a value or a property value within that object, and you want to create, for example, the length is always a good example. You want to just do some slight tweaks to it, but you want to do it in one line. That's a good example, because if you didn't do that, you basically have to do a for each object or a for each and iterate through and then do it that way. This just does it for us, so it might as well take advantage of it. One thing I did mention about select object is select object has a whole bunch of really cool features. I'm going to quickly touch on that after all this, and then basically, yeah, we'll probably wrap it up. Obviously, custom types for objects, we've covered that, basically using the PS type names. Again, I wouldn't use it. The only time I would consider using this is if I'm not using 5, but I'd have to have a really good example, a really good reason to be specifically typecasting something outside of 5. However, if I am building a specific object that needs to be typecasted, and there's reasons why you would typecast it for readability points. So basically, you don't want someone, trying to add a property, or trying to do something with that object that's not designed to do. Put two objects together, that's an apple and an orange, like we talked last time. You just do not do that. That's the reason why we have, the car object, and we had the book object. They're two separate entities. They're two separate schemas. They do not talk to each other. You can make them talk to each other using methods and things like that, but you do not. You wouldn't want to just jam them together. Like, that's just really bad. Obviously, and then finally using classes. We talked about that in our previous 101 class. I did mention we're going to quickly jump into. We're going to talk about select quickly again. So obviously get process. So let's just use get process. And we've got select object. Select object has a whole bunch of properties that you can use to do really quick filtering. So let's say you wanted to get the first item, you can use the first. and then I can say 1, or I can say 2, and that'll return the first 2 on the top of the list or the first 1. So if I want to get the first one, that's the first one. If I want to get the first 2, it'll return me 2. So if you're wanting to return the last, obviously, what do you think? What do you think it's going to be? Exactly. It's pretty straightforward. There's another thing which you can see, which I'm going to show you something which is really important. Is we're going to do select process name. We're going to select first one, and we're going to go property is process name, like so, and that's going to send me the Adobe Update Process Service. But this is something that if I want to just get the value, I don't want the property and value, because right now that's technically a property, because we've got the property process name, and then we've got the value Adobe Update Service. So if I want to just get the value, I can use, there's a parameter called expand, and expand basically expands on the property. Oh, sorry. I have to expand property, not property. So I go expand property, and then I specify the property name.
Process name.
Yep, like so. And then you can see it return the value and just the value. And that's really important because that catches people out sometimes. Some people will be like, oh, I'm doing a select, but I'm getting this. And you go, well, hang on, you do a select expand. Again, selects and select expands, you've got to be very careful about them. It depends on principle how I do it. So if I'm working with an object and I'm wanting to get more than one item from that, so let's say I've got, for example, get process property, let's just say, and then its property is process name and ID, like that. Let's say I've got 2 of them there. I'm going to save that as an object, just as a quick temporary object. If I'm basically calling that, let's say I'm wanting to do something with process name. People might be tempted to just do a select object process name, a select object expand property process name. But remember, it's a property, so I can just go process name. Now that's going to return me the 2 out of the collection, but from it makes more sense just to reference the property in that instance rather than doing a select expand property. And the reason why is because when you do a select expand property, you can't, I don't know, for me I just lose, it gets lost a little bit in the code. It's easier just to do like when you're doing a select. Now that's good for when you're just bashing stuff out and you need to get to an answer quickly, obviously in your own pipeline. But when you're doing things like when you're in scripting, it's easier to do your select statement. You've got your custom object, then basically you can just reference your properties outside of that. Now, one thing I would also want to talk about with select object, it has an exclude property parameter. So basically we can say everything but, and that's really good because you might have, let's say you've got 30 properties that you want to get from a collection, and there's 31. Well, hang on a second, why don't I just specify the 1? So a good example is if I go exclude the property ID, it will return everything else except the ID, which is fantastic because basically you can kind of flick it the other way. So it's very versatile, and the more you use select object, the more you obviously can see. There's another one called unique. Unique's really good because basically, as you can see, it takes a little longer, but what unique does is it basically produces a unique list of items. So if I go select unique name, let's say, because obviously there's in this instance there's multiple svc host.exe processes.
Yep.
If I do a unique, it removes them all except for 1. So it's basically cleaning it up, and it's really good because when let's say you have a massive list of different things and you want to just clean it up, and you can just go to a quick unique.
Or if you're running multiple instances of the same program.
Yeah, like things like that. You kind of, it's more along the lines of you want to clean up the property list so you don't have to iterate through the same one over and over again because it's redundant. It's going to slow down your code. You do unique, so you only touch it once.
Okay.
So it's basically that kind of circumstances. And I think that's pretty much it. I'm not going to really touch on anything else today because I do think we've run out of time, which is really good. If you guys have any questions, or if you got questions, just yell out now. Yeah, definitely would be good. I can definitely help you guys out. So just before obviously we get to the questions, you guys can just start chatting those questions through now if you want. Within any sort of PowerShell, with any sort of like with the upcoming PowerShell obviously hackathons. So like I said, if you guys are interested, just let me know. We can obviously get that on board. I've got a lot of hackathons in the pipeline that I'm obviously wanting to get going. So that's obviously things like I really do want to do the Battlefield 4 aimbot. I do think that's going to be a lot of fun. There's a lot of other things out there as well, which I think is probably it's a lot of beneficial. So this weekend, obviously going through PowerShell, PowerShell.org's PowerShell.org's forums. I'm going to go through there and do lessons on flow control and decision making in that. Obviously talking about obviously best practices and things like that in there. At the same time, we're obviously going to be talking about, we're going to be looking at other things, so obviously building DSC configurations and things like that. But basically, I'm just going to try and keep it as verbose and open up there for everybody. So, what do you have any questions or anything you want to add, or do you any comments or anything?
No, not at the moment.
Okay.
Just like Michael was saying, tune in on Saturday for his videos and.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much it. So
yeah.
Yeah, guys. I'm gonna pretty much finish it up there today. So thanks guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, obviously leave a comment, leave a like. I really would like to have a bit of feedback on what's going well, what's not going well. So if you guys can just throw me a message or just leave some comments, that'd be really good. But anyway, guys, thanks for that. Yeah, we'll see you next time. See you. Ciao. Bye for now.